Hey everyone, I'm not into clickbait on this channel, which is why even though there are loads of different reasons why micro ATX builds suck, I was also eager to point out that I do still have micro ATX builds. I have two computers, my 12-core Ryzen workstation PC and a home lab NAS. Both are micro ATX, and I love mATX for the NAS, it just makes sense. But I've recently grown to hate the micro ATX form factor for my workstation PC. It's become a complete pain and a false economy. So even though I do think the micro ATX builds have their place, which I'll discuss later on in this video, here's a bunch of reasons why you might want to avoid micro ATX altogether. So firstly, many micro ATX motherboards have multiple PCI Express slots, even full-size ones like in my workstation PC, but that second slot is completely pointless, it may as well not exist. That's because pretty much every single modern graphics card is a dual-slot GPU, well, other than cards like the beastly RTX 4090, which is a triple-slot card. This means that most graphics cards take up 2 or even 3 PCI Express slots. In other words, my Sapphire RX 6700 XT graphics card completely blocks the other full-size PCI Express slot. But how does this affect me? Well, I recently wanted to upgrade my home networking, so I purchased two 10GB networking cards. I put one of these in my home lab NAS build, which was easy to do because it doesn't have a separate graphics card to completely block everything up. I then moved over to my workstation PC. It didn't fit at all. This wasn't due to lack of trying though. I tried a bunch of things. For example, I loosened up the case screws and put my graphics card in at a weird angle, and then I rammed the networking card in and I thought that maybe, just maybe, this would work. But I then looked at the back ports and I realized that my card was resembling the Leaning Tower of Pisa, which apparently isn't ideal because this can actually kill PCI Express cards or even motherboards by placing too much stress on the PCI Express connectors. One alternative is to buy a full X16 riser card and then move your graphics cards away from the top slot. But honestly, riser cables are not easy to work with. They are very rigid, which is by design I guess, because it needs to protect the sensitive PCI Express cables. But unless you have a massive non-micro ATX case, you probably won't have anywhere to actually put the big bulky riser cable. You'll then end up trying to squish the cable down to relocate your graphics card even a tiny bit, and it all becomes a complete stressful mess. I didn't really see an easy way of using this 20cm 8-inch riser cable in my tiny micro ATX case in a way that would have probably secured and protected my graphics card. So that was fun. In the end, I just gave up on the idea of installing a 10GB networking card in my workstation PC, all thanks to micro ATX. Poor planning on my part, I guess, but let's skip over that point. Now you might be wondering, if there were two full-size X16 PCI Express slots, why can't I just put the graphics card into the bottom slot and my networking card into the top slot? Well, firstly, in my current case, I physically couldn't do this because of how close the PSU is to the bottom PCI Express slot. But there's actually a bigger problem here, other than the laws of physics. The second PCI Express slot only runs at X4 speeds. This isn't actually a flaw with micro ATX motherboards though, granted, it's actually due to how PCI Express lanes are divided between the CPU and the chipset. But running graphics cards at just X4 speeds will often result in lower gaming performance. Odin Hardware has done a great roundup video which shows that frame rates are noticeably lower when running a graphics card at this lower bandwidth. So even if my micro ATX case did have enough room for these two, I would then have to suffer lower gaming performance if I actually wanted 10GB networking, which kinda sucks, you shouldn't really have to make that choice, but there you go. I'd also be making it impossible to actually access all of the header connectors along the bottom of my case, meaning I'd then have to remove my graphics card every single time that I simply wanted to access them. On that note, there is one thing you could try if your PCI Express slot is covered by a GPU. You can actually go out and buy a really small right-angled PCI Express riser cable that you insert into the PCI Express slot before inserting the graphics card over it. This then allows you to freely plug another PCI Express card into that riser cable because it's then not being blocked off. And because it's right-angled, it usually only needs a tiny bit of clearance under the graphics card to fit. So what's not to love? Well, I will tell you. In general, these right-angled connectors only support X1 speeds, meaning they'd be too slow to support NVMe or 10GB expansion cards. Plus, they won't always fit. Going back to my workstation PC, for example, the PSU is right up against the edge of the motherboard, so I'd struggle to even fit this type of slimline riser cable in. At this point, you might be thinking, aha, I've had a brainwave. I'll buy a micro ATX motherboard, but stick it in a full ATX case, and that will work, and it'll offer some future-proofing options too, which is good. But even this can have downsides. For example, the case's fan connectors probably won't reach the motherboard's fan connectors because, relatively speaking, you've got a much bigger case and the motherboard is further away in this large case. Yes, this isn't a massive issue because you can buy fan extension cables, of course, but it's still worth considering. The next problem with micro ATX builds is that some motherboards have the main X16 slot too close to the CPU socket, meaning that the CPU heatsink is almost touching the back of your graphics card. Now this shouldn't cause shorts or anything as long as the GPU has a solid back panel, but it's still not ideal. This of course isn't an issue with good planning though. Companies like Notcher have really awesome compatibility checkers, which you should always use before buying any parts. And that's why my main PC now has a massive chocolate fan, in other words the Notcher C14S cooler, because many other CPU coolers simply didn't fit in my small Corsair Carbide ATX case. Anyway, to prevent this problem, what some micro ATX motherboards do is put a small X1 PCI Express slot in to act as a buffer between the CPU cooler and the main X16 slot. But then, due to a lack of space, they jam an M2 NVMe slot in there, making that X1 slot completely unusable if you have an M2 drive with a heatsink, because that heatsink adds extra height, which clashes with many PCI Express cards. Awesome. So if you want to cool down your overly warm Gen 4 or Gen 5 NVMe drives, you'll lose yet another PCI Express slot. So I mentioned in the intro that mATX has become a false economy for me, but why is this? Well, when I originally built this PC, I decided to go with a micro ATX motherboard, the Asus B500M Plus, partly due to its compact size, but partly because it was slightly cheaper than an ATX motherboard. And that decision seemed to make sense at the time, especially because I was reusing my old micro ATX case. I didn't want to have to spend more on a motherboard, plus buy a brand new case. But that decision has come back to haunt me, because I'm now unable to plug in a simple, tiny PCI Express card like this one. You can see just how cramped everything is inside my case. It's hard to actually add anything extra to the build. And I only have a dual slot GPU. This situation would be even worse with a larger triple slot GPU. Not that that would actually fit in my particular micro ATX case though, but you get my point. I do actually really want to install this card in, meaning that I'll either have to go back to the janky riser card approach, which I'm not convinced would fully work in my case, or I'd have to upgrade to an ATX motherboard and case. And basically, the money that I've then originally spent on my micro ATX motherboard has been completely wasted. It's a false economy. Now, I realise that I've moaned about the micro ATX format for like 5 minutes straight, but is there any positive to it? Well yes, I still think that there is. Firstly, mATX builds can work really well if you've got limited space. For example, in my home lab NAS, I wanted a small build that can fit my networking corner over there, and ideally sit on my simple £10 IKEA table that I have. The Aerocool CS106 case was really cheap and it worked out really well. You can barely see any size difference between my Synology NAS and my home lab one, right? Okay, so maybe you can, but it's still a good use case for micro ATX because a larger ATX case simply wouldn't have fit there. Next up, if you're working on a simple budget gaming PC, micro ATX might work out fine for you. After all, mATX motherboards are a bit cheaper, as long as you don't need to have 10 gigabit networking or loads of NVMe drives in the future. You might therefore be fine just to have a simple graphics card that dominates all your PCI Express slots like some sort of territorial cat. Sorry if that seems like a weird example. I have 2 cats and one of them thinks that they own every single square inch of this house, which is fun. So that's where mATX might work, but it's difficult to say for sure because you can't predict the future. When I built my workstation PC, for example, I didn't think that I would ever need 10 gigabit networking speeds, but now I do. Well, technically I don't need it since my motherboard offers 2.5 gig speeds, which will sort of be good enough for now, but you hopefully get my point, which is that I kind of want to brag to people at parties that I have 10 gigabit networking, gosh darn it. The other reason why mATX builds might make sense is if you use Wi-Fi to connect to the internet. While PCI Express Wi-Fi cards are quite reliable, they probably won't fit if you've got a graphics card, but thankfully some mATX motherboards have Wi-Fi built in, negating the need to have a separate PCI Express Wi-Fi card. But if not, you can always buy a USB Wi-Fi adapter as long as you stay away from the cheap no-name USB adapters because they're often terrible. Modern motherboards also have an M2 Wi-Fi slot, and these can be good to explore too. But in general, as long as you're aware the micro ATX builds do have some flaws, they can still be a good thing to buy. And as I mentioned at the start of this video, while I regret it for my workstation PC, I'm still really happy with that decision for my home lab NAS. I'll show off how and why I created my NAS in another video if you wanted to check that out. While it is admittedly 45 minutes long, it does have lots of chapters, so you can skip to the bits that you really want to see. And that wraps up this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please click the thumbs up button and please subscribe to see more videos like this. Thanks for watching.